Welcome to the Red Line Book Festival 2020. My name is Alison Yates and I'm one of the festival producers. The Red Line Book Festival is supported by South Dublin Libraries and Arts. We're thrilled to introduce Rob Doyle, who will be reading from his highly anticipated second novel, Threshold. Rob will be speaking with Nicole Flattery, author of the short story collection, Show Them a Good Time. Rob is also the judge of our short story competition and will be announcing the shortlist of this year's TU Dublin Red Line Book Festival short story competition tomorrow at 7 p.m. But for now, let's jump into the strange, wild ride that is Threshold.
Hi, I'm here interviewing Rob Doyle as part of the Red Line Book Festival. Rob is the author of three books. It's very impressive. The first is a novel called Tear the Young Men. The second was a collection of short stories. And now this is Threshold, which we can talk about what that is. And yes, I'm here in Smithfield. Rob is here in Berlin. We're living very different lives. Do you want to read, Rob, or do you want to do questions and then read?
Sure, yeah. I will read. Yes, Smithfield. I forgot you were there. Anyway, so I'm going to read because I'm in Berlin. I thought I would do something really crazy and unexpected and read from the Berlin chapter of Threshold, which is a kind of... Yeah, cool. It's called Mug. So the narrator, who I guess just for people who don't know what the book is, it's a kind of very heavily, explicitly autobiographical, semi-fictional kind of drifting, philosophical, confessional work about this guy who's, me in many respects, let's say, living his life, basically. So now he's in Berlin. On Christmas Eve, I visited Linda at her flat in the high-rise in Lichten. She cooked pumpkin soup while I reclined in the hammock that bisected the living room at an angle, rolling one Skinner joints for Linda to smoke in the narrow kitchen while she told me stories about her travels and love affairs. To me, Linda embodied all that was vital and underground in Berlin. When I thought of Berlin, I thought of it as the city where Linda lived. But now she was thinking about moving away. At least she'd had enough of the winters. I want to go where there are hammocks out of doors, she said. Tenerife, I said before licking a cigarette paper. Maybe Koh Samui for the trans parties. But actually, I want to go to Mexico. The place I want to go to is Kyoto, I said, though I like imagining it as much as I'd enjoy being there. They have temples, cherry blossoms, poems about the moon. She said, even in Kyoto, hearing the cuckoo's cry, I long for Kyoto. Drawing on a fresh joint, she told me she had finally got round to reading my books. She said she found my writing brave. I shifted in the hammock and replied that it made me uneasy whenever someone described my stuff as brave. It made me think I'd humiliated myself in ways I hadn't quite intended. She asked me what I was working on, and when I told her, she wondered if I ever felt I was living a certain way only so that I could write about it. If Linda's phone hadn't rung just then, I might have told her that the time when I could have understood such a question had passed, that I had long since solved the problem of authenticity, of making existence adhere to itself. I might have told her that my life was the research for the book I was writing about my life, and that this book, which was many books, would justify that life. Linda might then have smiled sadly and concluded that writing was a symptom of the sickness for which it was also the cure. Instead, she told me a story in which she had decided to have a child with a man in India, before realizing, at a point when it might well have been too late, that this was imperfectly wise. The story surprised me in that I had always viewed Linda's commitment to childlessness as an inviolable element of her nature. This had intrigued me when we first met in South America. Moreover, I could relate. The difference was that was considered the direction society was taking. These days, I appraised myself to be not only childless, but childish. That is, I lived like a child, concerned exclusively with novelty and selfish delight, relating even to geopolitics and the prospect of planetary catastrophe as modes of entertainment. Sometimes I judged myself brutally for this, but even the self-reproach seemed a kind of decadence, an exquisite late capitalist masochism. More often, I gave myself over to pleasure with ease of conscience, enjoying the spectral glow of what felt, on so many nights, like the twilight of a jaded civilization. I seemed to myself nakedly symptomatic of a general decline. When an epoch started tolerating the likes of me, you knew the game was up. It was nice to live like a child, though, better than it was to live as a man. Being a man was a grim slog of duty and sacrifice and repressed desire. Men had built European civilization, driven its expansionist phase, and now to us, history's children, to squander it. Linda and I talked for a few hours, then I went home. We did not have sex. This was hardly remarkable, yet it was striking too, because a decade earlier, that had been all we did, have sex. We had never been explicitly in a relationship, so it wasn't exactly that we had broken up and were now simply friends. Linda was getting older, and I was getting older too, at precisely the same rate. What had once been a raging blaze was now an affectionate glimmer. This was what aging meant. You had less sex, even with those with whom you once had record-breaking amounts of sex. Lust waned and friendship blossomed, and this was okay. It was nice. Alone in Berlin, I spent Christmas Day wandering out at Tempelhof, where the Nazis had built a characteristically grandiose airport, its environs since repurposed as an immense city park. Kite surfers and kite flyers busied the grey sky, and I thought about Sicily, where it was blue and kites flocked the coastal horizon at San Vito La Capo. I had gone to Sicily to write a novel, the great backpacker dropout novel, or something like that, but I abandoned it at the point when writing about my prior life had come to feel like infidelity to the vital present. Some Indians, or perhaps Pakistanis, played cricket on the airstrip, jumping on the spot to stay warm. I watched them until the cold moved me along. Thank you.
Now it's great. Minor blood.
The roars of the crowd.
This is all we have now, Rob. Just one person on the screen. Just
oh man, bleak new world.
I really enjoyed that passage. Okay, so this is like a question you probably get all the time, or have got all the time during this. But talk to me about the writing of this book. Like, how did you go about it, or what felt it
okay,
yeah.
So, my first book, which you mentioned, Here Are the Young Men, was a novel. It was published in 2014, and it was quite. It was quite a classical first novel in lots of ways. It was very much, I guess, a lightly. It was vaguely autobiographical, but essentially, a kind of coming of age novel about these young guys getting messed up and going off the rails in Dublin. And, it got pretty extreme and so on, but it was based on a lot of stuff I'd probably seen growing up and all that. But I used very much, the architecture of the plot, the characters, the dramatic intrigues between them and so on. And, had a blast writing it and really, cut my teeth as a writer. I took 4 years to write that book, figuring out the mechanics of it and how it all works and so on. And I was also in that period writing a lot of short fiction. really exploring different kind of expressive avenues, techniques, and then that, then I sold that second book as a collection of short stories, which came out a couple of years later. But around that same time, my interest in, say, novels, in the kind of that fiction of elaborated plots and, constructed, like overtly, explicitly fabricated characters and their kind of, their dramas and their interpersonal struggles and so on. It just lost a hell of a lot of interest for me. It wasn't really my thing anymore. And I was far more enthused by writing that at least started, or at least had its roots in autobiography, in the author's own experience, books that were at least as much kind of nonfiction really as fiction. And so I started writing some essays, and this was around the time, I guess, when I first knew yourself in Dublin. And I remember I wrote one essay for the Dublin Review on magic mushrooms. I just pitched an idea to Brendan Barrington, who's the editor there, about my long-standing interest, experiential and even, philosophical, let's say, in these fantastic mushrooms that grow in many parts of the world, which contain psilocybin, including Dublin, where my friends and I would pick them every year. It's mushroom season now, by the way. You should all be out there foraging. We draw a little map, But so I wrote that, and I was like, oh yes, I knew I had a kind of voice where I could be as I could just, instead of having to kind of do something I had no real interest in doing anymore, which was kind of creating plots and suspense and so on, I could find a form where I stay honed in on whatever it is that fascinates me and excites me, and but that also had great expressive potential. But it was essentially this first person voice where you can become very, very intimate with the reader, and then you can branch out to discussing philosophy, to discussing other authors, to digressions, humor. I just realized, wow, with this voice, I kind of, having published that essay, I just kind of knew, I wasn't 100% sure that I was writing a new book, but I had on the horizon, I could see a possible new book. And I kind of knew that this first person voice, this kind of playful, neurotic, inward, curious kind of voice was going to occupy the next few years of my writing life. I could just make it out on the horizon. And so sure enough, over the next 3 or 4 years, the idea that these were no longer just standalone investigations, but they were part of a bigger whole, in which I basically just got to talk about everything that interested me over a given period of life, began to take shape. And so Threshold, it's composed of 11 of these chapters, sections. They've all got these one-word titles like hotel or nightclub or grave or psychopomp, etc. And each one kind of works, I think, and functions almost as a standalone novel. It's almost like 11 novels or 11 autobiographical tales within one overarching whole, but they're kind of threaded together in all sorts of connective ways. So there's an overarching narrative. It's just, to be honest, really, it's just a kind of documentation of a period in life that was, for me, incredibly intense, very dark period, actually. It was a pretty savage and brutal time in all sorts of ways. but a very rich time in lots of other ways. And so, yeah, and there was a lot of travel in it. I've always liked writing about places. I'm one of those kind of ingrate. Sorry?
You write places really well. Like, I feel like
thank you.
every chapter, I felt like I was somewhere different. Like, well, I was somewhere different, but like, I think you captured. Yeah. It's hard to do. Like, I feel like I can only write one general place, so it's hard to zone in the specifics of something. So you do.
Yeah. I guess I can see from having read your book of short fiction. I kind of know what you mean. Place isn't as prominent a thing, but I think for me, particularly as my kind of my interest or even perhaps ability to write, to dream up characters and stuff kind of dwindles. Place and the mystique of place. I mean, I've always been a kind of drifter, I've spent I kept telling myself, I just get this out of my system in my 20s, and I'm well out of my 20s now. And it didn't really go away. So I'm still kind of doing that.
I think you hit on something sorry, I'm cutting you, but
no, go ahead.
The sections of which I really liked. It's like, I think, I'm not sure exactly where you are, but you're talking about real life, as in like, when am I going to go back to real life, or this concept of real life, which I think we're all fixated on in some way.
I think that was when I was in my early 20s, after, again, another very dark period. I'm always talking about these fucking dark periods of life as if it's all been a nightmare. But it was in my early 20s. And then I finished college and I just kind of left Ireland and drifted around Asia and South America for a few years. And when I was in India, I would meet these people, travelers, tourists, whatever, from the West, and they would be like, oh yeah, it's so fascinating to see this place just for a while before we get back to our real life. And I was kind of looking at them, kind of smiling and nodding, but secretly going, well, I don't know what that is, because I had no plans. I had no idea what the hell I wanted to do. So they had all careers and stuff like that to go back to. I didn't have anything like that. But more to the point, I didn't really want anything like that. I was very happy to be a kind of dropout, and just to read books and drift around. But yeah, travel is a huge thing in it. So because I'd spent already, I guess, a decade kind of drifting around the world prior to writing Threshold, prior to getting my first book published, I kind of felt, oh God, it's like I have all this massive wealth of materials, and I kind of want to have my cake and eat it, in the sense that, having had all of that rich discovery of the world beyond our little rainy island, but also somehow to capture the essence and the fascination and the atmospheres of those places, and so on. But also, I was living in Paris for a lot of the time I wrote the book, and then in Berlin. So that all crept into it too. But each chapter, I should also say, they're not just, pointless postcards from, here's me. It's like selfie literature on the beach or something. It's not like that. It's that each chapter basically kind of narrates the arc of a particular fascination, or in some cases, obsession, so, and a lot of it is about, so, the first chapter ended up being this one about magic mushrooms, and then there's another one about the Romanian pessimistic philosopher E.M. Cioran, which, I went to Paris to kind of tried to write a book about him, essentially, and I ended up more writing this chapter about not really being able to write a book about him. But it really did, that one in particular, that really was this working out of an obsession. I mean, it was an ecstatic obsession when I was in the grip of my fixation on his work. I don't know if you've ever read his stuff, but he's a kind of comic. He's kind of like... Sorry?
You're very persuasive. You really convinced me to read him.
Oh, yeah, you need to. You need him in your life, and at the same time, you don't. You should run a mile, because he really... He's sinister, he got inside my head to such an extent that I just couldn't read anything else for about 2 years. People were saying, oh, have you read the latest novel by I was like, no, I've been reading Joran. So I needed to kind of write this fixation out of my system. And I did with that chapter. And so that was kind of the case with a lot of these chapters. They take place in some fairly, exotic and colorful locations. But like there's one about discovering the lifeline for me of Buddhism and meditation at a certain point in my life, and then going to kind of Asia when I was much younger to to explore that. That's in there. And then the final kind of climactic chapter, which is also called Threshold, narrates my kind of metaphysical / philosophical fascination with an extremely powerful psychoactive substance, psychedelic substance called DMT, that some people may have heard of. I think when you start talking like that, half the readers kind of they tune out, but it's the other half I'm speaking to. But
I think it's
and of course the thing is when you have these kind of outre interests as a writer or just as a person, the trick, the challenge is to continually be seducing the reader into not feeling alienated by me and my weirdo obsessions. And so I think for me, the thing I'm proudest of in this book is really the voice, which, like I said early on, I realized I had discovered a kind of vehicle, a container that would be able to put everything I wanted into it. That could be quite conversational, quite humorous, quite kind of like comically, self ridiculing, but also, when it wanted to be, shamelessly earnest in its kind of spiritual and philosophical dimensions and in its kind of intellectual interests, while also getting in like lots of stupid sex jokes and stuff. So that's
one thing I think you write about really well is not writing, which I loved. There's this great paragraph.
I'm really good at that. Yeah.
I'm really good at not doing it too. But there's a great paragraph where you're in a cafe and you've got all your notebooks out and you're like, I need to go to a different cafe. And I empathize. I think it's like it's a difficult one to write about.
Yeah, it was the great discovery, the happy discovery of my recent artistic life is that you can get a whole book out of never quite getting around to whatever you're trying to write about in the first place,
Yeah.
Been that out for a whole career. I intend to do it.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. One thing I kind of wanted to ask you about is like you're like, just because I'm interested in this, like do you keep a lot of notes? Like how did you write about 10 years ago, for instance? Do you just keep notebooks like throughout your life, and did you go back to them, or like or did you just memories?
I mean, I certainly have at times kept. I always keep notebooks and journals and stuff, but to be honest, apart from like when I'm using one to like write something live, if I'm working on a story or a chapter or an essay, when I'm out and about in the day, I'll be scribbling down sentences and then using them all in that piece. But otherwise, I'll fill up lots of notebooks. I have any number of full notebooks going back many years that I know I'll never really go back to. I've tried that. It's like shit. I'm writing about time I spent in Asia and in India when I was it was over a decade ago. When I was on this kind of like sub Kerouac Dharma bum trip thing, trying to get to the bottom of all this Buddhist metaphysics and stuff. But I did try looking at some of the notebooks I kept in, but it's just excruciating. I wouldn't. Yeah. You don't want to. No, you don't want to go there. It's like, oh Christ, like what a twat, So and it's not so alive. You might get the odd detail and you go remember that, but what I kind of find is that you can generally you can generally rely on your own memory. And because for me, it's never a strict factual.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say, here's this book where everything in it actually happened, not everything in it did happen, but on some other level, as with all fiction, I like to think that it's essentially true. It's emotionally true. So I think for me, I mean, most of the chapters weren't written about stuff 10 years ago. There's one set in Sicily, which is just a kind of a straight memoir of like a half year I spent living quite a lonely time in Sicily, in a kind of beach town there called Alcamo. And that was 10 years ago. And then the one about Buddhist stuff was 10 years ago. But no, I think I just remembered most of it, and then made up the rest or whatever. And then actually the only time I did use anything, old material, like properly material, was in the final chapter. It's talking about this obsession with DMT, this kind of shockingly revelatory substance, and around which this whole kind of global cult has grown, of a lot of very, very startled people trying to say, like, what is this? This doesn't seem to connect to something just inside my mind. It seems to connect to something much more mysterious and kind of vast. But anyway, in the course of that chapter, there's a kind of flashback to a time when I lived in Bogota, Colombia, which again was a decade ago at least. And there I kind of fell in with this really kind of inspiring older group of kind of academics and intellectuals and writers and artists who would take ayahuasca every weekend in these kind of ceremonies. And for that, around that period of my life, I was keeping a blog, a very, very kind of extensive travel blog that ended up coming to like probably a couple of million words or something like that. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but probably not. It was long. Anyway, I did go back and found that, wow, this, I had put such effort at the time. I was, an aspiring writer then. I wasn't like, I wasn't publishing stuff or anything apart from like blogging, but I realized I had put such effort into capturing that scene. It was a scene of a very kind of crazy, storm-lashed, kind of apocalyptic ayahuasca ceremony out in the savannah in Colombia that I attended. But that I could actually transplant that from my old blog essentially into the book. And what was interesting about that was I found the style was kind of already there, which is interesting because obviously I've come a long way as a writer since then and learned a lot. But the beginnings of the voice that I now recognize as my own, like my mature voice or whatever, what was kind of there, which was reassuring. I still had to edit out some of the ropier adverbs and whatnot, but Yeah.
One thing I was thinking, there's a lot of abandoned novels or like abandoned novel ideas throughout the book. Should I also emphasize? And you have this great sentence. It's like, am I as a person a sympathetic character? Like, if you read a novel about me, would I be a sympathetic character? And it seems like I'm working on a novel now, and it seems like there's something you have to take into account. It's like, how is this person being perceived? Like, how's this character being perceived? Like, is their behavior like good or like? And it's extremely, I find that it's extremely strange. Like, it's hard to consider that. So I found that.
Yeah. Are you, if I may ask, are you still writing something about Andy Warhol? Is that, or is this one of these? Oh, you are. So you don't abandon them at the rate that I do. I mean, you're on it. You're on the kicks.
Going away with that.
Yeah. I think a large something I was very determined to do in this book is, I mean, this whole probably anyone who knows me is sick to death of me talking about it and going on about it, but this new culture of censoriousness and kind of punitive sanctimony and moralism and and a kind of Philistine moralism that's now increasingly started to colonize the arts and cause this global wave of, if not explicitly censorship, at least self-censorship. I think there's so much of that around. And what I kind of find objectionable in it is that, like, trying to portray oneself as anything other than messy, flawed, complex, it's a non-starter. It's like, are you going to write a book just to make people think you're just a nice guy or something, And so in writing about myself in this, obviously, people come up to me telling me, oh, your book is so honest, and I love that about it, and I take the compliment, and it's nice to hear. But in another sense, it's not entirely honest, because in writing this way, in kind of calling your narrator Rob and speaking in the first person and having him have so many similarities with yourself, you're still definitely cherry picking. You are presenting things a certain way. You're choosing to foreground some details and bring out others. But like the idea, it's like the name of that Nietzsche book, Ecce Homo, behold the man. It's like pretty much everybody I know, myself very much included, I think if you really get to know them, you find that these new demands from this quite shrill and quite, kind of somehow Americanized, socially mediated culture, which demands a kind of purity. It's like this Islamic, it's like almost like, any fundamentalist kind of movement will always demand purity and this kind of thing, but I don't really believe in it. I think if you get to know me or anyone around, you'll find that very few people are like straight up evil, and very few people are straight up good and perfect, and that's just not my experience of life. And so writing about myself, I wanted not to try to, I wanted to be conscious of not just trying to not to do an injustice in that way by making myself seem either worse or better than I am, but somehow incorporating the whole thing is always like the question of, are we sympathetic characters in the great novel of life? It depends on who's the author. I'm sure if I were to appear in any number of people, a monster, but
yeah, it's
so
the same thing. Yeah, I feel that like when you're creating a character now, and maybe this is why you moved to this like particular form, like it just feels so contrived. I'm like, she needs to have this backstory to explain why she did this, or and it seems so futile because so little is explained in like people's actual like life, like you're not gonna know why someone did this, it's what I'm struggling with fiction at the moment, because it just seems so,
Are all the characters in this one you're working on, are they real life figures, or have you like created characters too?
I've created characters, yeah. They're almost no real life figures, except for anymore.
Oh, okay. So he's not the narrator or something. He's not like the
I
main.
would never attempt that. I'm not brave enough. Brave is actually, when you're saying from that passage, brave is such a funny word. Like I feel like I heard the word brave when my own fiction came out, and I was like, I don't think I've done anything to particularly deserve that like word.
Yeah, and it is like I quite, in a narcissistic kind of way, I quite like that sentence about she called my writing brave, and then he or I or whatever kind of gets a bit uneasy, thinking, oh shit, brave, what have I given away here that I didn't intend to give away, I remember like someone told me that in is it in like Drag Race or something like that, RuPaul's Drag Race, when they want to kind of throw shade on somebody's outfit, they'll be like, "It's very brave," you know. So I think
Now I
in
know that. Yeah.
yeah, I
Again, I
think
know.
in writing, yeah, it can be the same thing, you know. Basically,
Yeah.
brave just means they've shamed themselves forever, you know. Maybe.
It's a funny thing, like you're talking about, like sympathetic or good narrators, and it's a question I like to ask anyway because I write a lot of criticism. But if, like, you write criticism too, I've read some of your reviews for like you did that series for the Irish Times, and I want to ask you about that. But
Oh yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
the Guardian and stuff, the process of like writing reviews versus being reviewed. Like, I'm sure lots of critics, I read a couple of reviews, like conflated you with your narrator, and it's kind of an intrusive process, and it's becoming more of an intrusive process because people are trying to measure like how morally good you are just through your book, and then it's,
Yeah,
you know, how
yeah.
did you
It's yeah, I know, but like, I mean, there's two questions there, and one of them is like the morality thing. Like I said, I've become a bit of a hardliner about all this. I really think there's a Philistine impulse behind it, you know, like a lot of people who maybe have no particular feel for art or for literature or whatever, but a lot of cultural clout, because a lot of cultural noise because of the new platforms which kind of dictate our culture. Social mores have become very vehement and loud and punitive in recent times, and so morality is coming into it, and I don't know about that, you know. Like, you get on with your life, you do the best you fucking can. I don't know, can we say that in this, but
can?
you know, you do the best you can, but like, I don't I, the artists I love, I don't, you know, yeah, you would like to think that they were just essentially decent or something, but I don't kind of need them to be saintly. So I find that a little bit, it can be a little bit intrusive, where you realize, I think I see it more in kind of internet reviews, which I have a real kind of perverse masochistic interest in, you know, these like unhinged, uninhibited Amazon reviews, or exactly. Oh, you get some fucking, you get, that can be a real run the gauntlet. So sometimes I like to read those just to see, you know. And but I think when people, particularly with this book, but also with my prior stuff, you know, when people really, really, you can tell it's really got to them in a bad way, and they're full of like loathing, and they hate everything I stand for. It always expresses itself on moral terms rather than aesthetic terms. That they just basically don't like how I see the world, or they don't like the thoughts I have, and they think that they're somehow impure, immoral, bad, or whatever. And you know, okay, fair enough. I'm not saying they shouldn't have their opinion about it, but to me, it's nothing really to do with the art, you know. And but the other thing is this question of reviewing and being reviewed. Yeah, I mean, you could say it was intrusive, but you know, I've very much brought it on myself with this book, you know. Like, it's an intrusive book. I'm intruding myself, you know. I'm kind of I'm definitely it was kind of an experiment in honesty a lot of the time too, you know. Like, what happens if you don't pretend that you're, you know, more evolved than you are? What if you do, you know, lust after this inappropriate person, or you know, whatever. But yeah, I'll just say it was kind of strange that I did feel my character, rather than my ability, or as well as my talents or otherwise as a writer, were very much up for public scrutiny. We're up for public debate. Like Roisin, you know, my girlfriend, she found that very strange as well. She's like, she opened up in her paper, and it was essentially a discussion of the personality, the character of Rob Doyle, you know. So it's kind of weird, but like I said, I think I was kind of asking for it. I kind of brought it on myself, but just by writing a book of that kind of nature, you know, which is almost provocatively, you know, saying like, fuck it, let's drop these kind of charades of fiction and let's just see what happens if we turn the heat up a little bit and say, you know, this is who I am, Ecce Homo. For a while, I was about a year ago, we were trying to come up with a title for the book. I hadn't thought of one, and one of the titles I wanted to run with for a while was Ecce Homo, which was a straight lift from Nietzsche's maniacal, crazy final book, his autobiography, which he wrote just before collapsing into insanity. But of course, she just thought that was commercial suicide and a dreadful idea, and too pretentious even for me. So that was shot down.
Something else, like I wanted to, when I was reading this, like one thing I enjoyed, and I think that we have in common, is this kind of disgust of work and like work culture, which you know, it's something that I've noticed over the last while, and I guess like social media feeds into it as well. It's just the professionalization of writing. Like it's become this job like any other job, whereas before it was sort of you did if you didn't want to do anything else. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's fair enough. Are you I remember about a year ago we talked and you were telling me you wanted to kind of be done with the whole social media thing. Well, I guess it was particularly Twitter we were talking about, because I was probably on one of my own rants about how it's just an engine of human misery and it brings out the worst in us and it incentivizes the worst people and all of that. But you were talking about you just wanted to just turn your back on the whole thing because it made you feel bad, and I was in the same boat. Did you do that in the end, or are you still hustling?
I agree with you. I think it's like the engine of human misery, like you said, and I think it like rewards bad behavior, or like
of course it's built into the platform. But did you walk away? Did you say
I'm still on Twitter? But I did. I was still there. Obviously, I'm. You know, I do things. I say I'll do things, when I don't do them. I'm not a sympathetic character. I do. Like I do. I guess what I'm saying about like the professionalization of writing is like suddenly you're handed this tool and like you're like, I can do this, that, or the other. And like if you look, like it's so easy, you know, it's almost so too easy to do the right things or like say the right things in order to get followers. And then suddenly you're like, this will sell my book. This will make me more popular.
Yeah.
It won't. Like it's all a lie, you know?
No, but also it will. Like I think it's a fast track. Not to denigrate, you know. We're all compromised. You know, we all like. I still use other social media platforms and all that, but I think like it's a very insidious and subtle process. I think that you can start to get the feedback, you know, that starts to shape you in a different way, and I think very soon you could become one of those. Not you. I mean, one could become one of those superfluous writers, really, you know, the ones who just tell the culture whatever it is they want to hear at a given moment. And I think you can go quite far in one sense like that, you know, you could probably become very successful and all that, but it's just like, fuck it, like I'd rather get a real job, you know. That's not, there's no honor in that for me. There's no, like, that's not why literature is something, you know, to be at the end of the day, to be revered and to be valued, you know. So one thing
I noticed, just like particularly like maybe not over the last few months, which I kind of feel like has shaken me out of complacency anyway, but I feel that like social media generally, like Twitter particularly, just makes me less empathetic. Like I feel like I judge people on like definitely their opinions. And like that is not a criteria I use in real life. Like I have friends that probably don't have the right opinions and stuff, but have lots of other great qualities and things. And the idea that I'm like scrolling away, being like having an opinion on this person I've never met, just kind of it made me feel awful there for a while. It made me feel horrible.
Yeah. I'm infinitely happier. I went back on it to like just I thought, well, fuck it, I have it there, so I may as well, utilize it for that like 2 month period around having a book out. So I just like, didn't engage at all. I just like put out all the advertisements and stuff, and then as soon as that ended, I was like, okay, I'm off again. And now, what I do is I just give my password to a friend, and so I can't get in. And that's been that way for like 6 months now or so. And I'm a nicer person. I'm kinder, I'm like, I'm less of just a misanthrope. I become such a misanthrope when I'm on there. I see people who I would probably get on very well with in real life, and I just fucking hate them, and I hate myself on there too, and I know that everyone else is hating me too, because you become hateable when you're on it. And also I think it's fucking up a lot of good people have become insufferable pricks because of it. I think that's why my loathing and bitterness about it becomes. I think it's kind of a graveyard for writers as well. You can become just again, it's that feedback loop. You're getting just enough of a dopamine hit, every time you put out something a bit like nasty, or a bit like, sniffing the ideological air and just going along with the current or whatever, that you just like, it's addictive, and I think it can. Anyway, enough rant over, as we say on the internet.
I agree, and you've persuaded me to try and quit again. But I just find that like
I'm not judging. It was just an interest, because it stuck in my head that you had said that, and I was in a very similar train of thought too. So I wouldn't judge.
No, well, I don't do anything on there, but I do like the scrolling and like the judging and the, like even the on there is me just going, like, looking at nothing, like registering nothing. Like, I feel like reading the worst book would be better for you than like being on there, because nothing's going in. Like, it's like but I was at home with my parents for like 10 weeks of lockdown, and just me and my parents, and not leaving the house, going to the supermarket maybe once a week, spending way too much time on Twitter, and it made me feel awful. Like, it really was the first time I really noticed like something like physical, like wrong with me, like from it. Like, I felt like I just didn't feel good at all. Then I made a concerted effort to stay off. I felt
as somebody said to me recently, I thought it was a good phrase. It's the platform for cops, snitches, and hysterics. I thought that was
it's a good one. Like,
a pithy formulation. Yeah, exactly.
I want to ask you about doing that series you did for the Irish Times, which was great, Rob.
Thank you. Yeah.
Are you gonna put that into like something larger, or like?
Yes, I will. Yeah. I mean, I kind of already have done. So this was last year I got the really, really enjoyable opportunity. Martin Doyle, the literary editor at the Irish Times, let me write a column every week, where I wrote about an old book, a book, pre-21st century book. They were kind of short, so it became this like exercise in haiku-like density and condensation and minimalism. But I just got to do what I kind of love best, really, which is enthusing about my passions and trying to impose them on the world. And just kind of like, it's kind of fun to be in that kind of like, middlebrow, respected Irish newspaper kind of space where, it can be all a bit like, it can all be of a certain kind of polite like tone and nature, and the interests, the intellectual or the literary interests can be maybe not always my thing. So I got to bring in all these weirdo pervert philosophers and deviant novelists and stuff. So that was great fun. So I did that all year. It was like 52 entries, and then I got to the end of it, and I had put quite a lot of effort into it, and so I was like, well, I want to do something with this. I kind of, first I was thinking I would just put it in the longer collection of like assorted best non-fiction writings I've done, which at some point in the future, probably a few years down the line, I hope to put out. But then I started thinking, no, what if I turn this into like a book in itself? And so during the lockdown, I took those 52 pieces and had a really beautiful time. I had a happy lockdown. You know, it's funny because the world was going through this crisis, and you know, we were all obviously vulnerable and afraid for our loved ones and all that. But on a personal level, I had this very rich lockdown. I was living alone down in Rosslare, so living by the beach, and it was just beautiful. And I was then on this roll where I was kind of expanding that into what I came to call an autobibliography. So it was, you know, these 52 columns, and then they were all interspersed by kind of autobiographical vignettes, micro essays, meditations and ruminations on a life of reading, you know, a bookish, a nerdish, bookish life. And yeah, it was, so yeah, there was an Irish publisher. I shouldn't say too much yet because nothing is finalized, but an Irish publisher had kind of asked me to write that. So as soon as I got that kind of green light, I thought, this is what I want to do now. So it's kind of like, it's a modest kind of short book rather than, you know, Threshold is the big, like, you know, bulgy kind of statement book thing, you know, a few years writing it and all that. Whereas this one, it's more, it's I don't know, I've always envied writers who write those kind of slim, elegant books. And I always try to do the same. And then when they come out, they're kind of bloated, you know, not so elegant. But so this one is actually, it's short and nice. So we'll see where that goes. I mean, it's, I don't know what's going to become of it, but I'm happy with it.
It must have been a rewarding kind of project to do that, like to go back over and find all these books and reread. And I feel like particularly when I write reviews and stuff, that I get kind of caught up in like publisher hype and like, you know, this book is the best book, this book will save your life kind of like stuff. And I don't see the actual rich work of like rereading stuff or finding like a classic and
I'm a cynical bastard. So whenever I hear, you know, this latest book is the best thing since, I kind of think we'll see 20 years, we'll see about that. So I mean, not to say I don't keep up with you know, contemporary stuff. I do, but it was a real joy actually just going into all of this. A lot of it was stuff that had been formative, or as I say in the introductory essay, kind of deformative to me. They're the books that really screwed me up, you know, the books that made my life a kind of tragic mess. And that's the highest compliment I can pay to them in some regards. Yeah. So yeah, it was great to do that, and just to kind of chart out, in a sense, the progress of a life, my own life, through the books that influenced me, that shaped me, formed me, that kind of thing. Yeah. And actually then, even when I expanded it into a double its size kind of book length affair during the lockdown, one of the reasons it was such a happy period was it kind of just happened. It just flowed. You know, usually writing books for me is a kind of torment. You know, it's pretty agonizing process. You know, I say that with no like element of, I love it. You know, it's delightful way to spend my life in some ways, but it tends to be massive amounts of work, you know, massive amounts of work just to get 5 pages or something. And so with this one, it was more because I had a structure in mind and I knew what I had to do. It kind of flowed, you know. It's very, so it was fun. I guess I had as much fun writing it as I have had with any other book. Yeah.
I'm sure when you were kind of going back over it, it's like surprising the amount, like the books that have actually influenced you or stayed with you. Like I've never comprised a list, but I'm sure it'd be like quite varied. But I don't know if you had this kind of reception to your book, but the reception to my story collection from a couple of people was just like this like it's like me clearing my throat. It's like, and then the novel will be the real book. You know, when will the real book appear? And
Yeah.
it's just funny that we consider novels like so much more like serious items or worthy items.
What? Why did they say that about yours? Is it just because of this prejudice that the short story is
I think it's
is
again
somehow?
it's not very taken as seriously, you know, or like essays
Yeah,
are like
and
this.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I don't see it. Yeah, I don't see it that way, but I know it is a widespread supposition. I think for me, when I wrote, excuse me, when I wrote my second book, This Is the Ritual, I think it was probably a bit truer for me than it would have been for you. Like, I think you're very much a natural short story writer, which is not to say that, you know, you're not going to be a natural novelist as well, but it's a form, but it's a form that you seem very comfortable in. And I imagine what's happening. Excuse me. I imagine I'm going to die live on air.
It's fine. It's fine.
Well, get your money's worth. But I get the feeling from having read Show Them a Good Time that you probably read a lot more short story collections and so on than I do. It's like probably it's a natural go-to, whereas I don't. I mean, there are short story writers who I love and collections that I love, but when I wrote my second book of my first book of short stories, it kind of was the clearing of the throat. Not exactly the clearing of the throat, but it was just a kind of experimental laboratory where I could try out a lot of stuff and see which directions I might want to go in. So, you know, I guess, what I'm saying is it was maybe truer for me than it was for you.
Yeah. Just one thing that I was thinking about of Threshold, just to go back to it, is maybe you disagree with me, but I definitely feel like it's kind of less misanthropic. There is like more kind of hope, and you're definitely working through something in a way that I didn't feel. Your other books.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think I've ever been some like straight up nihilist in any kind of uncomplicated way. Even in the earlier books were very confrontational. I mean, I like to think they were very funny too, or at least I had a great laugh writing them. But like Here the Young Man was very, despite the comedy, it was extremely kind of tortured and bleak and dystopian and, all of that. And so is This Is the Ritual in its own way. But weirdly, strangely enough, you're totally right. I think this is such a, even though it arguably came out of a darker period of life, a more like a real crisis period in life, where everything is kind of collapsing, your will is collapsing and everything is collapsing. Even though that's the case, I also do agree with you that it's more, there's more color in it, there's more levity in it, there's more of a kind of hard won, I wouldn't even say optimism, but there is a sense, particularly in the final chapter. I guess it's just a book about really trying to face up to all of the questions, the burning issues that tormented you in your youth, and realizing that as you age and as you leave youth behind, you've got a couple of choices there. You can blow your brains out, or you can try to find some sustaining sense of meaning and purpose in the world. And I mean, it would be of no interest to me, and presumably to anybody else, I think, if I were just to keep churning out, Here Are the Young Men style, disquisitions on human cruelty and pain and extreme. I don't like I all the artists that I revere and love it not only formally but personally they evolve through their work, you know, and the work becomes like a document of that, you know. Like you listen to your Leonard Cohen albums or whatever, the early ones have just very different personal thematic concerns than the later ones. I mean, there's a thread running through it all. And yeah, it's kind of like a confrontation with finding yourself in a world that does seem kind of, in so many ways, doomed and nihilistic and adrift, but then actually trying to find out, well, what can sustain me here, you know? And the stakes are very high in it. So I think that's one thing I find it difficult to get across when I try to explain to people what this book is about, because it's about everything and nothing, you know? So, but the underlying kind of theme and progress of it is extremely serious indeed. To me, the stakes are very high in it, you know? It's kind of asking very almost unfashionable questions, you know, about like the ultimate purpose of life. Like I think part of me is like this eternal teenager, in that those questions that, you know, everyone obsesses over at age 15 and 16, you know, about the ultimate aims and purpose of my own life, of given life, of human existence itself. I never really grew out of them. And I guess writing has become my way of trying to somehow confront that, but also to hopefully bring back into life, at least into my own life, something that prior generations would have found in religiosity, you know, some kind of connection to a transcendent truth or reality. I'm not saying this is not like, and now I'm going to mass or something, you know. I don't mean it that way. I mean, just, you know, from time immemorial, human cultures and human individuals have used the symbols and the rituals of religion to kind of make sense of their own distress, their own native distress as human beings, but also to try to find glimpses of something higher, something, like I say, transcendent. And here we are in this kind of spiritually impoverished, technological, chaotic 21st century, where all of those metaphors and symbols and rituals don't really work anymore. You know, it's hard. Well, it's hard for me anyway to take them at face value, or to. So, and then you realize that your life is just acutely disastrous and painful and confusing. And maybe when you're younger, you feel a kind of hubristic sense of, you know, fearlessness around that. But then as you get older and life just keeps pounding you down, you know, you're just getting blows left, right, and center, and you're not really able to deal with it. You start thinking, yeah, I'm going to find my sustenance, you know. And I guess the book, another thing I like about Threshold, I'm proud of, is that whereas my other books were very confrontational and full of, you know, real obsessive investigations of the darker aspects of life and of the human being. This one, in many ways, it's made up almost purely of things that I love, you know, from writers I love to places I've been that have really moved me, to the people. You know, there's a lot of people in the book. And so I guess that's my way of enacting an answer to these ultimate questions that I really kind of feel an ongoing urgent need to address. So the book itself becomes its own answer to these questions. How do you sustain yourself in a world that's so brutal and confusing? And
I think that, like, what you're saying there makes perfect sense. And Also the fact that like I don't think it's a particularly brutal book. You know, you write friendship really well, particularly
Yeah,
well, but
that's
it is like a I don't know. It's a good book about getting older. I kind of feel even in my own work, like I'm not early 30s, but like I don't
yeah,
know what I'm struggling with in this book is like stuff I think I would have done even in my late 20s in my fiction. I just feel like it's pointless now. Like I think you have some kind of line in there about like being harsh isn't necessarily like the truth, you know, like it isn't like um yeah. So it's
yeah.
kind of the first time I feel that like when I sit down at the desk and I feel older, like I feel like my concerns are different than they were, you know.
Yeah, and it's no bad thing. I
No.
think I would say that I'm very glad that I did manage to get the more extreme,
Mm.
more more disturbing, more tormented and aggressive and confrontational books out of me then, and all of the cruelty, you know, not even me being cruel, but like the obsession with cruelty. I'm glad I got them out while I had it in me to do so, because they were the books suitable to that period of life. And like I said, if I were to just keep repeating that now, that would be so, it would be boring. It wouldn't be exciting even to me. And so, um, yeah, I guess it sounds almost trite to say it, but that's what one would hope to do, which is to keep writing the books congruent with the phase of life one is in,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And the concerns do evolve. You know, if you're not evolving and mutating, then there's probably something wrong, you know. Like I've even had experiences recently that have, you know, because I'm always, I don't really have a very good imagination at all. So I'm always kind of like desperately hoping that something interesting will happen in real life that I might somehow be able to, you know, turn into a story or something. But some experiences have happened even recently, which have been so big and unprecedented, unexpected. And I mean personal stuff, you know, stuff about people in my life and all of that. Some very great and nourishing stuff. And whether or not I ever write about any of it, the idea that life can still produce experiences and knowledge which you didn't really have factored into your worldview before, you know. I think that's a good thing, and that's why that's why you're not writing the same way that you were writing in your early 20s or in your
Yeah.
in your 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same, and I wouldn't want to be either.
No, no, no. And I think it's like even though it kind of feels more difficult now, like I feel like I was still writing in my 20s, I'd know exactly what to do. But now I feel I don't know, turn away
Why
from that.
why do you why
I
do you
don't
say
know.
that? Is it
I think it can be a bit glib, and now I'm kind of like, oh no, that's too glib. I feel like
right?
I guess like I don't know, like I guess that kind of whole sort of like one-liners and stuff just seems a bit pointless or something. But I was going to say something about Threshold, which is that it's a very complex book, which is like a high compliment. And I write reviews, so I read a lot of kind of modern fiction, for better or for worse. And I feel like there is a kind of even subtly, even books that kind of like pat themselves on the back for doing it. There's a sort of turning towards simplicity, you know. Like I
Mm,
feel like everything I don't want to argue with anything. Everything is like there for the point of view of someone like me, you know. Like, um,
mm.
do you agree? Do you have any thoughts on that? Or
Uh, yeah, I mean, I'm flattered and pleased that you see it that way about this book. And yeah, I would hope so. I think there are different ways of looking at it. I think if I understand you right, I think what you're talking about at its worst is this new facile kind of writing, which just simply flatters the pre-existing, you know, moral worldview and beliefs and ideologies of of the reader, you know, like here's a novel about how, you know, nice the immigrants are, or, you know, here's a novel about, you know, this or that, you know, whatever ideological kind of flavor of the month is. But, and yeah, of course, I find that like of no interest, you know.
Yeah.
Complexity is the thing. But the other thing I would say is there's one way to kind of recoil from that, from the kind of stupidity of the age, is to kind of go into a kind of like neo-modernist fetishization of difficulty and that kind of thing. But that's just not my way either. You know, I think, I guess, as a reader, I have a strong kind of hedonistic bent. You know, I kind of want it to be delightful, really. You know, even if it's scary and dark and all that stuff, I want it to be seductive. I want to be seduced by a book, and so I think all of the complexity in this is maybe emotional complexity, and yeah, okay, a bit of formal complexity, but it's not like reading, I don't know, Infinite Jest, or, you know, some dense, difficult, you know, willfully difficult kind of modernist kind of novel. I always want to be, I have such an aversion to boredom, and to kind of arduousness, really, in reading, and in that I don't want to be one of those writers who are making it easy. I kind of want to invite the reader in, you know, give them the best glass of wine, and give them a nice chair to sit in, and make sure they're well taken care of, you know, and then go into some fucking hellish states of like suicidal derangement and all that, but make it as fluid, as pleasant, as as enjoyable an experience as possible, you know. So like, I guess what I'm saying with that is like, I like to think my stuff is, I value a book being readable. I know you're not really supposed to say that, you know, that's like middlebrow sentiment or something. Yeah, but I do, you know, I do, yeah. Yeah, who, if I can ask, who are you reading these days that you would say you've got to read this? Because,
that's what
or have you read anything?
I did read something good recently. Oh, I'm reading, actually it's over there, Liv Ullmann, Unquiet. Have you heard of that? Sorry.
I've heard of it. I've heard the name, yeah.
Yeah. So she is that actress, Lynn Ullmann's daughter, who was married to Bergman, and they worked together. And it's kind of about like being on. Yeah. It's really good, actually. But I read like a good few things in lockdown, like stuff that kind of held my attention, and like I felt like I got back into a good. I read Emma Klein's new short story collection, which was quite good.
Oh yeah, Daddy. Yeah. Good title.
Yeah. A lot of bad men in that. Like, there's another one.
Right.
But and then just like Andy Warhol stuff. So,
research.
Yeah. But what about you?
Cool.
I'm watching The Sopranos, which I've never watched before, which is like taking.
Important cultural text. Yeah, for sure.
Have you watched it?
Huh?
Have you watched it?
I didn't watch the whole series, but I kind of phased in and out. So I've seen maybe a couple of seasons. All in all, I should probably go back and watch the whole thing.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah. What about you? Have you been watching or reading something good?
I'm reading a book now called The Seduction of Unreason, which is about the long-standing fascination of fascism to intellectuals. It's provocative. It's written by an American professor about 15 years ago. But it's very interesting. I don't know. It's kind of like lofty stuff. I feel like a bit of a prick saying that's what I'm reading, you know. But it's pretty interesting. I don't know. Yeah, I don't read as many novels at the moment as I used to. I've been saying that for years. I But what? Wait, I'm sure I've read some good stuff. I'm getting one of those brain freeze moments. Yeah.
I read Mark O'Connell's book, which I liked very much.
Oh yeah, so did I. Yeah. It was. Yeah, he's very good. Yeah, it was nice.
But yeah, it's just like, we're gone into another lockdown here for another 3 weeks, so I'm sure to get lots more reading done. One of the problems with these Zoom things is that you can't get questions from the audience. What kind of questions do you think? No. Yeah.
Oh, so I'm going to invent my own questions from the audience.
Yeah. Do you have a question that you think the audience will ask?
I would. Something about this city, maybe. I don't know. Berlin.
Yeah.
How is it? I don't know. Huh?
How is it in Berlin?
Oh yeah, it's great. It's great. I think, like we were saying just before we went live, the whole plague thing they just controlled it better here. I don't really understand it because the curtain twitchers in Ireland, the morality police on Twitter or whatever, seem to be giving everyone an absolute nightmare if they're seen, close to another person or whatever. Whereas here, by the Irish standards, the behaviour would be seen as pretty reckless. Like, the nightclubs are closed and stuff, but there are parties happening, with certain vague restrictions in place, and the bars are all full, the cafes are all full, and yet the rates of infection are just way lower. So I can't really explain it, but it's just a far more germane, agreeable place to be writing out the end times and the great pestilence than Ireland. I don't know. I wouldn't go that far. I used to live just around the corner from there in Stoneybatter. Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I feel like I've been confronted over the last few months, but like, I never really considered myself like a hugely social person because like I work from home and my work is solitary. Or whatever. Actually, I am a very social person, and like I've been telling people this, like I'm shocked by it, and they're like, "Yes, obviously, like we knew this about you." So I found it pretty difficult. Like, it's pretty tough few. Yeah. I like seeing people in the real life flesh. I like seeing their faces.
Yeah. I mean, it has its charms, but I that wasn't my experience. I mean, to be honest, by the time like the first wave of lockdown ended, I was very much ready for it to end. But for the first couple of months, I think a lot of people had this same experience, going, "God, I'm so much better in this world than I am in that, messy human world with the bodies and all that, So
We'll see how it goes in the next months. Hopefully things will get better. We better wrap this up. It was lovely to talk to you, Rob. And
you too, Nicole.
Yeah. And I look forward to your new one.
Same here. Likewise. Get to work.
Well.
Thanks, Nicole.
No
Bye,
worries.
humans.